Thank you for coming today to the Safe, Vibrant, and Healthy Communities Committee meeting. Bynum, we're going to start off with a staff review. Oh, and Christina Jones is absent and excused today.
Good morning. My name is Bynum Walter. I work in Raleigh Planning and Development. I'm just going to provide a quick overview of Z5422 before you have your discussion. We heard most of this at the public hearing, and so I'm going to try to go quickly.
Since it's committee,
Yes,
let's
ma'am.
not go quickly, let's go thoroughly.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Of course. So this is a request to rezone 2.6 acres at Peace Street and West Street. The request is going from IX12 to DX30 urban general frontage with conditions. This is consistent with the future land use map, the urban form map, and the comprehensive plan. And Planning Commission did recommend approval to council with additional suggestions. The site you can see here is on the west side of Capitol Boulevard, the east side of West Street. Glenwood Brooklyn neighborhood is to the left, and you can see the future Smoky Hollow Park to the east, and also the emerging Smoky Hollow development on the south side of Peace Street here. The applicant has offered a number of zoning conditions, and I'll walk through those. The first one is that they have limited some uses. They've prohibited some group living uses, adult establishment, pawn shop, vehicle fuel sales, detention center, jail, and prison. They've prohibited on-site surface parking between any building and the eastern boundary of their site. So essentially prohibiting parking between the building and the future park. And they have provided that site plans would include a pedestrian connection to the future park. Additional conditions require that any site plan include a 2,500 square foot outdoor amenity area meeting the urban plaza standards along Peace Street and/or adjacent to the city-owned parcel, which is the future park. And they have limited office uses to no more than 500,000 gross square feet. I wanted to talk briefly. During the public hearing, we heard comments from community with questions about staff's findings of consistency with a number of policies. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how that determination was made. So the future land use map here is Central Business District, which indicates a range of uses and heights that would support the Central Business District, our downtown. This site and the future land use map works in combination with Table LU2, which is a recommended height designation table in the comprehensive plan. And so core transit in the Central Business District, which this site is considered core transit, the height recommendation there is between 3 and 40 feet. And then there was some question from the neighborhood about why was this not considered an edge location. The edge location is defined as within 150 feet of residential zoning, and this site is not. There's about between 225 and 250 feet between the western border of this site and the residential zoning in Glenwood, Brooklyn. The urban form map here also reinforces that, so this is part of the downtown designation on the urban form map and also the frequent transit area as well. And just a reminder of where we anticipate where existing transit is and also how this relates to future expectation of bus rapid transit, the northern corridor. While we are in the process of evaluating that alignment, the alignment closest to downtown, I think, is the least in question in that process. I also wanted to talk about the building height transitions map. So this map shows places is a policy map that guides height transition between the Central Business District and downtown, or downtown and adjacent residential areas. This site is not called out as a transition area on this map. I don't have specific knowledge of the creation of this map, but I do believe that The transition is anticipated really to happen here west of the site. So again, I mentioned this about between 225, 250 feet from the Glenwood Brooklyn residential zoning. So you have the West Street right-of-way, you have the parcels on the west side of West Street, and then you also have the railroad right-of-way here between the site in question and the Glenwood Brooklyn neighborhood. So a pretty good distance there. I think it would be reasonable to expect the transition to happen there rather on the site in question as part of the rezoning. That's certainly how staff has interpreted the policies around this. So just wanted to offer that as background around why staff's findings had come out the way they had, because I think there were some questions there. I also wanted to acknowledge Glenwood Brooklyn is designated as a local historic district. There are regulations that guide development in the Glenwood Brooklyn neighborhood. So development, modifications to development in that area are subject to the certificate of appropriateness process and subject to review by the Raleigh Historic Development Commission. Those regulations do not apply to properties outside of the historic district nearby or adjacent. And so those regulations really apply to the neighborhood proper and not to areas nearby.
So for instance, when we had the Godwin rezoning, those rules apply. That's within there.
I don't remember the Godwin. You're going to have to tell me. I don't know what you're referring to.
That was one we recently approved. It was requesting the ability to host events.
Oh, right.
An event
on
space.
Washington Street.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that Ira is whispering to me. My colleague is whispering to me that is not actually in the historic district.
That wasn't in the historic district either?
That's the one property that
That's the
is not.
yeah. That parcel in particular is.
Wow. I had no idea.
Yeah, yeah. So just a reminder, Planning Commission does recommend approval here, and their advice, their kind of caveat there was acknowledging concerns about glare and shadow and how those might be represented in zoning conditions. I also did want to show, so these are not materials generated by staff, they were actually generated by the applicant. I don't know if Mr. Paul intends to show them, but I thought it might be helpful to you to see the renderings that they have shown to Planning Commission and to the public as well. So again, these are not city-generated images. These are generated by the applicant. I just want to share them with you for context. So this is a view of the park edge. So this is looking south. You can see, I'm not going to use the laser because they told me it's very bright. I don't want to hurt anybody's eyes. But if you,
It's bright enough in here.
if you look in the left rear, you can see the Holiday Inn Tower, which I think is a kind of a good landmark to help you understand where you're looking. There you go. That's right. Perfect. Looking downtown.
Oh, back there. Okay.
Yeah. So just helping you understand that you're looking south towards downtown, how this fits in with that. And then this is another view looking south, but from a higher elevation. So you can see the existing development on the west side of West Street, on the right-hand side of the picture here. And then this is a view from a residential property in Glenwood, Brooklyn, looking towards the development site and the future Smoky Hollow Park. And then this is a view from Glenwood and Peace, looking east. So you can see the development on what would be on the west side of the future Smoky Hollow Park. And then the only other thing that staff wanted to highlight for you is about this ongoing partnership discussion. I'm going to actually step aside so Ken Bowers can talk to you about that.
So in the interest of giving you full information, the applicant has approached staff to talk about potential partnerships between the development and the proposed Smoky Hollow Park. This is not currently incorporated in the rezoning, so that's the first thing we show in the slide. And so where the rezoning stands today, this partnership may or may not happen if you approve or deny the case that's in front of you. But we have had ongoing discussions. Those discussions have been positive. There appears to be a good basis for a partnership where there's benefits to both the city and the development to entering into the partnership. And the basic form of the partnership is that the city would pledge the funding that's already allocated from various sources to the park, which is currently not sufficient to complete everything that's in the park master plan. And the developer would deliver the park, essentially construct it on our behalf in conjunction with their development program, which will solve some logistical issues in terms of constructing a building on their tight site, and would allow them to have control over delivering the park on the same schedule as the development project, which means that the amenity would exist at the time that that building was finished and ready for leasing or sale, depending on the nature of the development. We would then reimburse them for that work. And anything over and above in terms of implementing park amenities, they would be making a financial contribution for if they put things in the park that were not part of what we have budgeted for in terms of building out the full master plan. But again, to stress, that is some conversations that are not memorialized in any way in the zoning case. The only way that they could be decided by council on the same schedule is if you were to hold a decision and the city were and the developer were to negotiate a development agreement, which would be a separate agreement, but it could be brought before council on the same schedule as a final vote on the zoning case. The only other thing I would note, of course, is that the park is a great amenity. The city has planned for the park. Doesn't necessarily offset the specific impacts that have been raised with regards to the development proposal. Be happy to answer any questions.
I have two.
Yeah, I have one. Go on.
My first one is, were the community members who've been engaged in this process, have they been a part of the conversation about the park?
No.
Okay. And then my second question, I just want to clarify, are you saying that the developer would build out the park and we would reimburse them for that work?
Yes. But again, we've had discussions. There's no formal agreement in place to do those things.
Remind me again how much we set aside for the park in the bond.
I'm going to look at my colleague Jake, but I believe we have $12.5 million in the bond.
Yeah, so $2 million from the 2014 Parks Fund funded some of the design and preparation. Another 11 and a half or so was in the most recent, totaling 13 and a half. And the current estimate in total to build the park is around 20 million, up from I think 17 and a half or so in the most recent concept plan. Sorry, that was passed in November.
And part of the directive we gave staff at the time was to look for potential partners to help us build this park because we knew we didn't have enough money.
That's correct.
Let me ask this. How long would it take to negotiate a development agreement?
Well, it's hard to give a definitive figure. I would think it would take 6 months.
So that would mean if we were to go that route, we would hold the rezoning for 6 months.
Yes. If you wanted to decide them both at the same time, you would have to hold a decision on the zoning. And the way the calendar works, once the hearing is, I believe the hearing can be held open indefinitely. The hearing's still open. Once the hearing is closed, there's 30 days to amend any zoning conditions. Of course, this would not necessarily involve zoning conditions since the development agreement is a separate agreement from the zoning case. But there's no clock ticking to render a vote after that hearing is closed that I'm aware of.
Okay, just want to understand the implications. please sit at the table. Thank you, Councilmember Harrison. She is not part of the committee, but here today, this is her district. So anyhow, we are going to, do we have any questions for staff? Councilmember Patton? Okay. All right. Next step, we'll hear from the applicant. If you have any additional information you'd like to share, then we're going to open up to the public.
We just have Matt call on behalf of the applicant. We have Chris Carter here, Raleigh Development Group. Yeah. So we just have updates on conversations, and we have a number of folks here from the neighborhood, who Roy Atride and some others who will, I'm sure, speak. Where, here? Okay, gotcha. So, as you heard, the main comments have been about height. And so I'm really going to just kind of cut to the chase in terms of where we are in the process. We did have an opportunity to visit Roy's home. And some of you may have been over there. He's got a demonstration to help understand kind of the relationship between proposed building heights and the properties there that I think was good for us to see. This just shows the area, the Flythe building there currently. Wait, hey, Chris, is this the presentation? I don't think it is. Yeah. Right. So, I'm sorry, there's another one that's just brief update. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Project maintenance, right?
Yeah, let's see that. Can you go to the next one? Let me just see. I mean, the next slide. That's it. Yep. Thanks. I have handouts if we have trouble, but I think we've got it now. Oh, you have the handouts? Mm-hmm. Okay. So one of the things we met a week ago, I think, a little over a week ago, and it was helpful. I mean, it wasn't, I think it was, there was some frustration, about dealing with some of the issues. But the positive thing that came out of that was, I think, the parties all agree that height is, and the way it's measured versus the number of stories is the main concern of the neighbors. So that was very helpful to hear. Roy has generated some, including the demonstration at his home, some illustrations to show kind of the relationship of the building and the angles and the height to the neighborhood. This just shows you, again, the distances from the site to the Brooklyn Glenwood neighborhood. If you go, oh, I think you.
Give me a little bit of a map before I'm going to have to drive.
Okay, could you go to the next one then, please? Thanks. And this just shows all of the parcels. So basically, one of the things that we understood from the meeting is that there's a concern about what could be built under the proposed zoning. So currently it's zoned IX12, which obviously is an industrial use. I think everyone's happy to see the industrial uses go away and a more mixed-use category come in place. But some concern over about what could be built at 30 stories. We understood that under the 12 stories, it could be somewhere in the range of 240 feet. In reality, I mean, I think the standard that we used in this presentation is a 16-foot floor to ceiling. The 240 would actually be a little taller than that, but it was helpful to hear that information. Based on the 30-story projection, the neighbors have been concerned that it would allow for a construction up to like 550 feet or over 500-foot building at 30 stories. And so with the concern being about the building height, we have come up, and if you could scroll up a little bit, I'm sorry. And one of the comments at Planning Commission was about the site as it moves to the north. Obviously, it's an oddly configured site. It's a triangle. It gets very narrow, and the neighborhood is more to the north, although it does start, Devereaux, Tilden. But so what we're proposing is to cap the height at 250 feet, which is a little more than the 12-story current zoning of what could happen on two of the parcels, which is essentially 40% of this site. If you measured the West Street longitudinally, or that 250 would be about 40% of it, the top 40% of the site. And then we propose having a cap of 400 feet on the bottom 60% of the site. So that would still, allow flexibility to do something. I think that people would, on the positive side, from a design gateway standpoint, the advantage of being able to go taller is you can have a more slender floor plate versus the massing. And we'll see that in a minute if you keep going down.
Could you just state again, Mac, what, under the 12-story, what is the height measurement under 12 stories?
Well, what we're proposing is to put a cap of 250 feet through a zoning condition. Currently, the neighbors have been concerned, or their view is that we could build about 240 feet under the 12-story by right. Our calculation, as you'll see, under the 16-foot kind of standard, it would be more like 192 feet under the by right. But anyway, putting a very significant cap over what could be built there on the 40% northern part of the site. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Anybody
we
have
just
questions about that?
This just shows some examples in Raleigh. So you can see the wide variance depending on height. So the PNC is over 500 feet, almost 540 feet, but it's a condo and an office building. You have 2 Hanover Truist building. The Eastern that was just constructed actually is shorter at 372 feet, even though it's 36 stories, because it is multifamily and not these bigger kind of commercial floor plates. And then you can see just the example of the by right 12-story at 192 feet. So, and then a couple of other, this is showing what the 30-story could allow with a 16-foot floor plate up to 480 feet. And then lastly, well, this is I think a helpful illustration. So there is, a principle in the transition, and you heard from staff, this isn't like officially in what's the transition area, the downtown element, but there are a bunch of policies in the comprehensive plan, and we found one, I've been struggling how to have a conversation around the relationship of the height to the neighborhood, because it isn't immediately abutting. We've done the shadow studies. You've seen the pictures showing kind of the building in the background, but there's still concerns. It doesn't fill in everyone's mind in terms of what does that really mean? What will it feel like when it's built? But there is this principle about a 45-degree angle if you're abutting a property that's zoned over 7 stories next to a low-density residential. So we just took that and extrapolated from it as a kind of a useful, and plus, Roy was focused on angle and concerned about a really, steep 72 or 80 degree angle from the neighborhood looking almost straight up. So, this will show you the section from the neighborhood, railroad, et cetera, et cetera. And if you, use that just as a a principle. It shows you that you get into this 250-foot range right at West Street. So it's a useful, I think it's to give some peace of mind, I guess, that the relationship of the building to the neighborhood is going to be in line with something that applies when you're immediately abutting. But again, you know, and
Matt, who did the shadow study for you?
Eastman Perkins, architectural firm that has been working on this project. And that's been one of the things that I think is helpful, at least to have like a professional design firm to do some of the measurements, because obviously we're not capable of doing it on our own. And then this is a very helpful, I think, comparison of the site. You know, you can see like that oddly configured site. So actually the south is on the right, north is on the left, and it shows, you know, the by right 192 feet, and then the DX 30 by right. I mean, if it was zoned DX 30. And then what we're proposing is in the second to the last, which is the step down to 250 and then up to 400. And then the last one is sort of, and you'll see it, kind of like what we would anticipate. It hasn't been designed yet, but we do envision this. I mean, there are all sorts of UDO requirements about floor plates, so you can't have like one massive building. You know, you have to have a constrained floor plate. And we do anticipate like what is called a grand staircase in between the buildings. And as you know, I mean, we have lots of properties zoned 40 stories in Raleigh, and we've never had a building built over, I mean, Eastern is the most stories, but PNC is, you know, 32 stories, I think. So, you know, it's really to create the flexibility to be able to design it. And of course, the neighbors have to be concerned about worst case scenario, and that, you know, is generating their comments. But the reality is this is kind of, you know, show you what would be likely built there. This shows you the floor plates with the break in between the buildings from the park, which would be a nice design feature, and pass through. And then lastly, let's see, this is just showing you kind of very different from the earlier image that you saw with some of the massing of the step down to the 250 feet to the north. And yeah, good. And then this is just another image of the interface of the park. And there have been a lot of conversations, obviously, with the city about that. And I do want to say about the question on the development agreement, we have had that conversation. We posed it very early on. And just through the progression of conversations, you know, I think the feedback was, let's just keep them separate. And obviously that is a possibility if we need to go in that direction of the development agreement. But I do know it kind of puts, it's a little bit tricky. We had this recently with the Crabtree Bridge situation where we had a rezoning case that included a creation of a bridge over Crabtree Creek and a nice pedestrian connection, but it was not part of the zoning case. And that agreement has finally been completed and will be coming to the city, but it was separate from the zoning case. I think that's it. Well, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, here's some real just precedent images. Again, I think just to make the point, like being able to go taller can produce a nice design and also have some transparency and openness between the buildings. Keep going. There are a couple other examples of projects, you know, similar scale. And then lastly, I think that, you know, the downside, you know, of something that's not as tall is the massing tends to be bigger, and it's not as efficient to construct, but it also makes you kind of take up the entire site. So it's just, there's a trade-off there. Okay, so happy to answer any questions.
Do you have any questions of Matt before we hear from the public? Councilmember Patton?
Sounds like Planning Commission gave y'all suggestions to consider, like glare reducing construction and materials. Have you had any conversations with your client about that?
Yeah, and I'll definitely defer to staff. We've had conversations with staff. The only thing really specific I've heard back is that it's the kind of reflectivity of the glass, and there's certain types of glass in particular. Mostly glass is not used much in construction. You think back in the 70s, like the mirrored glass you saw in office buildings. So there's, you know, we could offer a condition to specify what would not be permitted from a glare standpoint. But from talking to the architects, there are lots and lots of factors that go into glare. Like, for instance, balconies and breaking up the facade prevents more reflectivity, articulation of the building. So we're open to finding ways to incorporate that. Just from talking to the architects in the city, the most obvious thing is the reflectivity of the glass.
But then there's other things you can do to break that up, like
Yes.
balconies. Okay. Councilmember Patton, is any other questions?
I'm good for now.
Councilmember Fort?
No questions right now.
Okay. All right. Who is here from the public who would like to speak? So Roy, do you want to start?
So I did send quite a bit of material over the course of this case to all city council members and mayor. I think Mac appropriately verbalized our concerns about height. I would say that our original thoughts were the height of the building would be somewhere around 300 feet. So we were already thinking below 300, well below 300. We've continued to do research of the comprehensive plan, UDO, the equitable transportation plan, as well as the Raleigh downtown plan. We can't really find a justification for a building this high, what would be one of the third as big as the Wachovia building right next to a neighborhood. Seems fairly inappropriate. It would overshadow the neighborhood. While the development itself doesn't fall within the historic district, it would have an impact on the historic neighborhood, which is both the local historic neighborhood and a national historic neighborhood. Our analysis has shown that there are 17 different comprehensive plan policies that would be violated by this. Almost every comprehensive plan policy that deals with any transition to a neighborhood, of which there are many in this case. The downtown transition governed by MAP is only one of the many policies that govern transition to neighborhoods. So there are a lot more that would lead us to have this development taper to engage the neighborhood appropriately. We've already talked about the staff report. I think we've also talked about the table LU2, which does allow for 3 to 4 stories on core and downtown districts. I think that difference in height is to allow to engage other buildings in the area. It doesn't say you can jump right to 40 stories or 30 stories. Staff even mentioned in their report that generous reading would lead to a 12-story designation in this building, in this area. We went back and tried to continue to understand how this plot was zoned for 12 stories to begin with. We found in 2015, there was a case during the remapping, and I've got links to this that I've shared, in which this exact parcel was discussed. City planning and planning commission recommended this be 5 to 7 stories. And Mayor, you were there as a city councilwoman at that point in time. The landowner lobbied for additional height. The additional height was granted to 12 stories. So this exact parcel has already been upzoned from what was recommended to a higher height and more stories to allow for additional density and height. To allow it to come back again and have additional height put on top of that, what was noticed in the conversation and talked about quite a bit is the height was for the entirety of the park all the way from West Street to Capitol. There's quite a topographic change, and so the thought was that the city could have additional height, but it wouldn't overwhelm the neighborhood, except where you get to this site, in which case it goes up 34 feet. Stone wall comes up 34 feet, and therefore this is going to be the most prominent position on the site, and therefore add that on top of any building height. So our recommendation, of course, is going to be to make it as short as possible so that it doesn't overwhelm the neighborhood, so that it doesn't create a wall. When Mac mentioned 480 feet was what might be allowed under 30-story zoning, I did set up my ladder in the backyard once again, and we looked at it, and it's about 80 degrees that you would have to look to see sky. It's pretty overwhelming for a significant portion of the neighborhood. We've talked about this site is adjacent to the neighborhood for 3 different blocks. It would have a lot of effect on a lot of different houses. As we went through, and we also looked at all of the different planning, all of the different public inputs to the different plans, and all of the different things that have been done over the last really 15, 20 years, none of them point to this being a 30-story appropriate building space. Steve Schuster, who was the city planning chair, a respected architect who passed away in the last couple of years, mentioned in his comments about this exact site and offering to allow all of downtown to be zoned at 40 stories so that we wouldn't have zoning cases mentioned, and this is in the green tab, the last tab. I think height history, page. Page 2, we have multiple national registered historic districts in our downtown, and I think personally to give everyone the right to go maximum height regardless of where they are in the downtown is inappropriate. When there are other values of our historic properties that would all of the sudden be absolutely devalued. I just would ask you to take a look at the context as has been called out for free zoning. Ask you to take a look at the experts and what was said. It was only 8 years ago, and we went through this. To come back and to go from 4 to 12 to 30 just seems completely overwhelming and inappropriate. I would ask you to weigh the historic nature of our neighborhood, what we have brought to downtown Raleigh and the partnerships that we've brought. I just ask you to look through the materials that we pulled together, trying to make a factually based argument for what is appropriate on the site. And we think 12 stories is actually above what should already be allowed on this site, and 30 stories is well outside of what would be appropriate for this site. I apologize for the book, but I did want to give you at least one written version of what I've been working on for at least the last 6 months. And I hope you read it, even if it's to take a look at what the neighborhood thought of this sort of development. I appreciate Mac and Chris coming over, talking to us. There's just not a lot of common ground here. You're overwhelming single story, 2-story homes with a huge development. I love the city. I want the city to grow. I want to see development. I want to see density. But 12 stories right next to our neighborhood is dense enough.
Okay, Ben?
Thank you very much. My name is Ben Kuhn. I live at 1223 Pierce Street, which is in the neighborhood along the railroad tracks, a little bit further down north towards the concrete plant, but on the railroad tracks. This is an interesting case, as we all know. You have addressed this property very specifically in your 2015 downtown plan. I've sent that information to you, and I forwarded it to you, and I'll just make it part of the record, Ralph, if I may. And here are several copies. I think that'll go around. Give you an extra 2, just in case. Matt, you will. The downtown plan was developed in 2015, and it was established for the next 10 years, which would take it through 2025. It came along with enormous community engagement, as outlined in my presentation on slide 3. It says that they organized and facilitated public events that attracted more than 1,000 Raleigh stakeholders. There's a lot of energy that was put into this. The focus of the downtown plan was a collective vision, and it included the Devereaux Meadows Park and Greenway and the extension of West Street North. It designated an area called the North End, which was the area over by Seaboard Station, and it talked about that area being in contrast to the large-scale redevelopment contemplated on the south end. The vision for the north end over along Seaboard would fill gaps. And then it also had another section called the Glenwood Green. And the Glenwood Green, of course, included the nightlife district of Glenwood Avenue, but it also spread over to West Street and Harrington Street, primarily south of P Street, except for this site. This site was the only location that was addressed in the Glenwood Green plan in the 2015 downtown plan. And so if you look at that on, I think, page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about slide 7, it shows where the Glenwood Green area covers. And it had also renderings or diagrams of what the buildings that the planning department and stakeholders, 1,000 plus, saw as being developed one day in the future on this property. And if you flip through this thing, it shows you very clearly 7 and 8 stories, which was consistent with what basically planning staff had proposed previously before it got upzoned during the political process, the lobbying process, where it was upzoned further to 12 stories. And I would also point out, I'm maybe one of the few people in this room that has developed, that has actually negotiated a development agreement with a municipality involving a residential condominium overlooking a municipal park. The Vega condominium project, 7 stories in downtown Durham, we negotiated with the city of Durham. That included probably $750,000 coming out of my client's pocket for that, inclusive of skate park, other park improvements, stormwater improvements, everything else. What I would suggest to you, if you're trying to negotiate something like that and you're going to do the rezoning first, you give up an extraordinary amount of leverage. And I don't understand why you would do that. Why you would let one go forward first and not, because you have more leverage if you do it within the context of the rezoning. And I would also suggest to you, if we can negotiate a development agreement for a 7-story residential condominium building overlooking Durham Bulls Athletic Park, someone can do that with respect to a 12-story building too. So it doesn't mean that you can't negotiate that with a 12-story building. You can. You should. There's an enormous amount of density on 2.6 acres of property. The Wells Fargo building is on 1.2 acres of property. It's, what we say, 30 stories, 29 stories? Okay, you could do probably 2 or 3 30-story Wells Fargo buildings on that site. That kind of density is just not what the city, the stakeholders, people that were involved when this downtown plan was produced had envisioned at all. The other area that I'd like to focus on is there's this suggestion that this is a core transit area. And core transit area is supposed to be within a quarter mile of a transit area station. The suggestion is that the west and I think it's Johnson Street location would be one of the BRT station alternatives for that area. The other one is located at the convergence of McDowell, Dawson, and Capitol, right on the southern edge of the Longleaf Hotel building, where everything converges. That is what I refer to as the Capitol Boulevard BRT transit station location. In the materials I sent yesterday, it shows very clearly that it is 0.30 miles away from the site in question, which means it is outside of the quarter-mile transit area location. I contacted one of your transit planners, Het Patel, yesterday, transit planning supervisor for the city of Raleigh, and asked him that question because it defies logic that the BRT route would go up West Street. And he confirmed that. He says, to answer your question below, the alternatives under consideration coming out of downtown utilize Dawson, McDowell, and Capitol, not West Street. So to suggest that the core area transit station at West and Johnson puts this within the realm of a core transit area is incorrect. It's also unclear how long the northern BRT route is going to take to mobilize. It's in the early planning stages. It's not programmed to come online until 2030. And frankly, there are other better areas to spend scarce resources the city has for BRT along the western, the southern, and the eastern routes. So whether the northern BRT route ever gets built, who knows? But in any event, this is not a core transit area. And if it's not, it doesn't get that height treatment in the height table. And if it doesn't, then it goes into the general category. And if you look at the height limitation of the general category, it says maximum 12 stories. So you would be going against very clear guidance in your comprehensive plan to do this. It makes no sense from a development standpoint. It makes no sense from a standpoint of negotiating a development agreement in the park. And the other thing is they would negotiate with you if they did 12 stories too. So for all those reasons, clearly, and I'll pass around the map as well that shows the 0.30 miles drawn on a line from IMAX. And this site doesn't warrant increased height at this location at all. And I have nothing further at this time.
So I'd just like some clarification from staff. This runs contrary to what you just said, Bynum. Could you clarify what? I'm a little confused.
Mayor, I just want to make sure I'm clear. This is a question about why the staff determined this to be a transit service site.
Well, just the specifics of this on West Street and whatnot.
I think, Mayor, your question was specifically about the likelihood of change to the alignment of the BRT coming out of downtown. Is that right?
Or, yeah, and
Yeah. So I'm actually going to look at Jason Myers from Transportation and ask him if, I don't know what conversation Mr. Kuhn had with Mr. Patel from the Raleigh Transit staff.
I just wrote, it said, which one is it going to be? And he said, not West Street.
so that runs contrary to what?
And I forwarded that email to you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you here.
Jason Myers, Transportation. Ongoing MIS that Raleigh Transit is undertaking did start with the perspective of both are possible, and I think during that process has ruled out West Street. Now, how that fit into the determination that planning made in evaluating the comp plan, I'm not sure of the timing of that, and I have not been personally very engaged in that study. But yes, I do understand that Capitol and Dawson McDowell are those alternatives. Now, I don't think there is a specific station location at this point in that MIS. And this may be passing on drafts, knowledge about what the drafts from the consultant team will be, and it may not be released to the public yet at this point. And I'm not sure if any of my colleagues have more information than that than I do.
So we don't have do we have clarity or not?
We have clarity that we are no longer considering West Street. I do not think there is any clarity of where the stations would be along Dawson, McDowell, and Capitol Boulevard.
Okay. Ben, I'm going to jump to Philip now, and then we have Larry. Philip, you had raised your hand. Do you want to speak?
I think Mayor Baldwin, you know that I was actively involved in the whole process for the comprehensive plan and the
Could you
UDO.
speak into the microphone so anybody watching?
Okay. That's okay, I can say it. I was involved extensively throughout the 10-year process where we put together the comprehensive plan and the UDO. I think it was an excellent process, but based on what I've been hearing recently and seeing about some of the approvals downtown, I'm rather astonished. I do recall that the Planning Commission did have a meeting on January 6, 2015. Roy referenced it. There was a 40-minute conversation among the planning commissioners. And I thought it was very valuable because it put everything in context about context. Steve Schuster was referenced. Rodney Swink was a participant. And Ken Bowers made an excellent presentation, and he had a map that talked about where height should be and I remember very distinctly, I found the video in the archives, that things should taper down to 3 to 5 stories, particularly around our historic neighborhoods. I think any neighborhood. So I'm really disappointed that we're not giving more consideration to context. I asked you, does context matter anymore? I really have to question that. I also wonder if plans matter anymore. We had the downtown plan, we have the comprehensive plan. And I do remember prior to the comprehensive plan being started, George Chapman was the director at the time. Mary Ann, you probably remember him.
I sure do.
And he called together a bunch of developers, land use attorneys, neighborhood residents after a very controversial zoning case. And he said, what can we do to eliminate all this contentious and wasteful discussion that goes on? And everybody seemed to conclude. I remember Roger Perry was there. I'm not too sure if Mac was there or not. Tom Worth was there, I do remember. But everybody said we need a predictable process. And if we did have a predictable process, none of us would be sitting here today. But at this point, we don't know what to expect. And as leaders, I think you want people to trust you. But if nothing is predictable, how can we trust you if we don't know what the heck you're going to do? So I hope you will do the right thing with this project, because I certainly consider it totally out of scale. The picture you saw from Devereaux Street, you could see leaves are on the trees, so you could barely see the building. There's no leaves there today. I guess when you looked at the buildings, particularly in one of the slides I recall, it looked like maybe we're in San Francisco. It looked like a foggy day. So I think some of that stuff was misleading. You really have to take a hard look about this and even some other projects, because I'm concerned about the quality of life in the city of Raleigh. I have been here since 1990. I think some of you know we had a pretty horrible incident over the weekend. I did see some of the luster that Raleigh has had over the years deteriorating. And it's been one of your primary strengths. And I'd hate to see this disappear, because I came from Boston. I think, Mary Ann, you came from Rhode Island. Apparently Boston is losing people. San Francisco, they also, it was a wonderful place to visit. People are leaving San Francisco today. Some of them are coming here, I'm sure. But, if we don't manage quality in this city, I think we are going to have some difficult times in future years. And that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Larry, if you would pass the microphone that way, thank you.
I'm going to sit down here.
Okay.
All right. My name's Larry Miller. I'm president of the Glenwood South Neighborhood Collaborative. I'm here to speak not on behalf of any private interests, because I don't represent any private interests in this hearing. I'm here to talk more about the public interest. What we represent 950. We have 950 members and businesses in Glenwood South, and it's up to the city council to make the public interest determination. I've looked at what the city staff has suggested, and that's what it is. It's a suggestion, because the city council gets to make the decision. I have no particular expertise to argue against them. Apparently, there's some people here that think they have that expertise, but I would rely on the city staff, because this is something they do on a daily basis, and they provide this information to you to help you make your decisions. But I want to talk a little bit about the park here, because from Glenwood South, I mean, that is adjacent to our neighborhood, and we're looking. Back when the park bond was being discussed, there was I think there was $13.5 million that was proposed for the bond for this, And the council, intentionally struck out $2 million and said, staff, hey, go out and find somebody for a public-private partnership so we can help get this park developed, because we don't have the resources. And there are a lot of the counselors that at the time were saying, hey, we need a public-private partnership. That's the thing of the future. That's how we're going to get things done. So now we have that. We have a public-private partnership that would supplement the funding to help create this park that we're looking for in a more expeditious, more attractive, and probably a more economical and a quicker than if we relied on the public funding. I understand the staff has come up with a $500,000 from storm abatement funds to cover this $2 million deficit. But here's an opportunity to make this park happen sooner. We've had discussions here that the two processes are separate. They can go their separate ways. Legally, that's probably true. It is true legally. But in reality, I would surmise that if the density is not approved for this project, the public-private partnership is probably not going to happen. So you're going to lose out on that opportunity to get the funds and the creation of this park supplemented. Also, the park, the density at this location, there's going to be a greenway there. So it's going to enhance or create density near the greenway for bike transportation. There's also some suggestion that there could be a continuation of the bike lanes up West Street. Again, we're looking for density near public transportation sites. Greenways, bike lanes, density, they go together. As far as being near the BRT, that's so far in the future. Hopefully, it'll happen in my lifetime. The northern route is the last one. Hopefully, we will get that. And as far as the site, I don't know what that's going to be, but this dense site would be close to the BRT route. Anyway, okay, so I agree with the city staff on their determinations on comprehensive plan, future land use, and the other things. I just want, after hearing the discussions today, I just want to comment on the being adjacent to a historic district. I just have a problem understanding when you're separated by this nice vegetative tree buffer, a railroad track, existing warehouse buildings, a street, how that can be considered adjacent and how that just, it doesn't make sense, common sense. Again, I don't know the legal standards for that, but to me that just doesn't make any sense that you can say this historic neighborhood is adjacent to this proposed development. All right, I think that covers my contribution to this, and so thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else from the public wish to speak?
Can this be a little interactive? Can I respond to something? Or is my
Yeah, that's
time
what
up?
I'm asking right now. Yeah.
Larry, I'm Phil Poe, by the way. I don't think I introduced myself. On numerous occasions, yes. Mayor Baldwin, you know where I live since we've had meetings about the Sahara at my house before. But when you talk about 250 feet, you're talking about where I live, about mid-block on Devereux Street, and you go down to Glenwood, The entire block is 400 feet. So we're talking about where I live down to Glenwood Avenue, and that's about 250 feet. That is not a long distance. So when you say it's adequate, you talk about a railroad track, you talk about, apparently there's going to be high-speed rail there at some point in time. 250 feet to the facade of this building is not a long distance. And I really get concerned about also, when we talk about this height, we have something called mixed-use transitions, and I think it's up to a maximum of 100 feet, but the assumption going into that was always that we'd probably have 3 to 5 stories, so that seemed to work extremely well. But if we're going for 100 feet, and then you can go up to, and you say that transition's been met, and now you can go up to 300 or 400 feet, that doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever.
Right.
In the UDO, it says anything that is not defined within the UDO in terms of definition of terms, the general meaning of words and terms in section 12(1.1.1). All words and terms used have their commonly accepted and ordinary meaning unless they are specifically defined in the UDO context. This is in the document I provided for you. The definition of adjacent by Merriam-Webster's dictionary is nearby, close at hand. That is not you can't measure that. That's tough. But I think those terms are what allow this type of debate. The comprehensive plan does specifically use 2 separate terms, abutting, which does mean sharing a common edge, and adjacent, which by the dictionary is nearby or close at hand. There is an edge condition at 150 feet. This is outside the edge condition, but once again, I think a lot of the transitions speak to 40 stories tapering down to adjacent neighborhoods in DT 1.1.2, which is downtown edges. The central business district says height in the downtown could reach as high as 40 stories at the core, but would taper down to meet adjacent neighborhoods at a height of 3 to 4 stories. Buffering requirements also have adjacent areas of lower intensity, should provide effective buffers. Mitigating impacts also has adjacent. Transit area transitions also specifically focuses on transitions from higher density near transit, directly next to transit stations, transitioning down to lower heights in the neighborhood. These are just some of the ways in which I looked at the comprehensive plan, and I would agree, Larry. I would have liked to have seen a more in-depth analysis. Staff and I have talked. We've talked about the difference in my reading, in their reading. Some of that difference comes to the fact that there are not defined terms that allow us to make a definite decision on exactly what is meant. But I would say in a case in which there are 26 or 27 different policies that could help inform, almost all of those inform at a lower height, and not speaking to having 30 to 40 stories at the edges. And that's really what the basis of the analysis sort of shows, is not, there are a couple of things that I would say are definite things that would point to lower height, but the body of the work almost by itself also speaks to engaging the neighborhoods and the neighborhood resources. Transitions are mentioned over 43 times in the comprehensive plan. Neighborhoods are mentioned 150 times. They can't be taken separately from each other. And so I think it's just important to note that this 30 stories really just cuts across most of the comprehensive plan and the downtown plan.
Okay, I'm going to cut off conversation now because we're getting into the point where we're repeating ourselves. I think I'm going to bring it back to the table and see what we might want to, like, do you have questions of, let's get our questions answered, and then, let's see, is council member, yes, she is. She's still here. Councilmember Patton, what questions do you have?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks everyone for sharing your comments. Really appreciate them. I have a quick question for staff. The parcels in between the neighborhood and the property in question, what is the current zoning on those parcels?
The current zoning there is IX3,
Okay,
Industrial Mixed Use 3.
okay,
It's
great.
the same base district as what's on the parcels
Parcel in
in the
question.
rezoning request.
Okay, got it. Thank you. And then question for the applicant. This is a significant increase in density based on the entitlement that's already in place. And so when we think about significant public benefit that comes along with that, there's been a lot of discussion of the park, but significant public benefit I would like to hear about is affordable housing. Have you had conversations about that? What's the appetite of your client to take on affordable housing in this space?
I know we talked a little bit about it. In this particular location, affordable housing. So like in this particular location, the policies have pushed us in a direction toward the park partnership just because it's adjacent and logical. So we haven't looked closely at affordable housing. We haven't heard a lot from the community about affordable housing, and none of the policies that, I mean, there are obviously general policies about affordable housing, but specific to this site. So understand the need for public benefits. In this case, we feel like we can have a much, much greater impact with that benefit around the park relationship. And I mean, and I'll just elaborate a little bit more on the public benefit because I didn't really touch on this. And I do think it's, it's the tension we've got here is when you're in downtown, there's a reason downtown is at the epicenter of the city's comprehensive plan. It's the heart of the city. And when we adopted the 2009 comprehensive plan, we moved from like a multimodal regional centers with Triangle Town Center and Briar Creek to making downtown the heart of the city. And so these sites are few and far between where you have an opportunity to fill many of those goals, which are, we all know the benefits. You're going to have reduced traffic, reduced emissions, greater activation, more housing. We're going to bring a lot of folks downtown through this opportunity. And so they're in cleaning up, one of the most polluted streams and the park opportunity. So I just want to, there's this broad citywide interest here at stake, and it's harder because they're dispersed around the city. But we do have that plan that kind of grounds us in the importance of downtown. And I recognize there are tensions where you've got, a neighborhood nearby, and I know you all have to kind of work through that. But I just want to point out there are lots and lots of important public benefits here.
And then one more question about housing. Since this is mixed use, maybe I'm lost in all the information that's been given, but is there a promise of housing or just an implication that it will come?
There isn't like a condition that mandates. We do have a restriction on the amount of office.
Got it. Thank you.
Would you consider looking at a condition that does promise housing? Because part of what we need is housing.
And that's certainly what we intend to build on this site. As everyone knows, at the moment, housing just works the best at the moment, but conditions could change over time, but we would certainly be open to exploring how to incorporate a condition that ensures that housing is built on this site.
That would be important to activating the park
Absolutely.
and other instances. Councilmember Fort?
So for
Were you done?
for the community members that are here, sounds like the park may have been something that did y'all just hear about that today, or had you heard about it?
The park, man, we've heard about it.
Okay. So does that change your viewpoint on the rezoning?
No, unfortunately, because there's no direct access, as staff pointed out, you have to walk around and all the way around to get to the park. We have Fletcher Park that is nearby. We want parks, we want green spaces, but for us, the 30-story building overshadowing both the neighborhood and the park is not something that would counteract the height of the building for the impacts to the neighborhood.
Any other questions?
I would just, again, it's 2.6 acres, 12 stories entitlement. It's an enormous, enormous amount of square footage, well in excess of 500,000 square feet. You could easily do a development agreement with them at 12 stories, existing zoning height. And if they want what they want, you can ask them to put affordable housing conditions in there. And if you want some, I have some I can share with you from Chapel Hill. In the development agreement.
Any other questions, Councilmember Fort? Okay. So there's a couple of things I guess we could do here. We could keep this in committee. One of the things I think we'd be interested in having a conversation with the district counselor and some of her insights. So the option would also be to report this out with no action taken and have a discussion at the table amongst a broader group of council members. And I think it also, with the applicant, you've heard some of what has been discussed today. I know at some point you'll be asking to put in additional conditions, but also there is the question of the development agreement, and if that's something that you think would be wise to pursue. So we have a decision to make about whether we keep it in committee, whether we take it out of committee, bring it back to the full table for a discussion at a later date.
Before we decide that, we do have the district counselor here. Could we hear from Councilmember Harrison?
That is normally not what is done in committee work. We're the committee members, and there's no precedent for that.
Okay.
And it would be more appropriate to have a discussion at the table with other council members. The city attorney's nodding her head.
That's fine. I feel like it's not quite ready to go back to the full table. I think that there's some important things to get figured out. I think it sounds like there's more discussions to be had about the height. I appreciate the applicant's willingness to show these massing studies and reduce the absolute height, but I think maybe there's more that could be done. Or if reducing the height is not something they'd be interested in, then I certainly think affordable housing in this area is really necessary. So, I would be interested in getting, tightening it up in either of those areas. So I would be in support of keeping it in committee.
Hey, Councilmember.
I'd love to, before I make a motion, I'd love to hear.
We're having a discussion. Councilmember Fort, what is your
I would agree with Councilmember Patton. I definitely think the community members have been very engaged in this process for a while. They probably need to have an opportunity to have more conversations with the applicant and see if they can work on some issues around the height. And then certainly if housing affordability is a part of the conversation, then that's something new for the applicant to go back and have some conversations about as well. So.
Well, I don't think we need a motion. I think it will just stay. Do we need a motion?
Yeah, remember that we're still, have not, the public hearing's still open.
Right.
So we have to keep what I've called the chain of custody. So if you can make a motion to continue to a date certain, which I guess will be safe, healthy, vibrant for next month.
Yes.
And then at that time, you will either further continue it to another committee meeting or set the public hearing continuance date at that time. So
that would be March 28th, and then set.
well, I guess it'll just depend. You're going to keep it in committee, so there's no need to set the date for the public hearing to continue. But the idea is anybody knows the next meeting to come to hear this. So that will be the next Safe Vibrant, and at that time you'll decide whether you send it back to council or keep it here, either one for a date certain.
Okay, so let's make a motion in that regard.
Motion to continue this case in Safe, Vibrant, and Healthy Communities Committee until March 28th.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay. All right, I want to thank everybody for coming out and taking the time to have these conversations. And I think this was constructive because it did feel like a conversation today, a little less formal. Everybody had There were no time limits. Everybody could say what they wanted. And I think that this has been helpful to all of us. So I will adjourn the meeting, and remember, we'll be back here on the 28th of March. Thank you.